Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman, GCB, was a British Liberal Party politician who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1905 to 1908 and leader of the Liberal Party from 1899 to 1908. He also served as Secretary of State for War twice, in the cabinets of Gladstone and Rosebery. He was the first First Lord of the Treasury to be officially called Prime Minister, the term only coming into official usage 5 days after he took office. He also remains the only person to date to hold the positions of both Prime Minister and Father of the House at the same time. Known colloquially as CB, he was a firm believer in free trade, Irish Home Rule and the improvement of social conditions. He has been referred to as Britain's first, and only, radical Prime Minister. Following a general election defeat in 1900, Campbell-Bannerman went on to lead the Liberal Party to a landslide victory over the Conservative Party at the 1906 general election, also the last election in which the Liberals gained an overall majority in the House of Commons. The government he subsequently led passed legislation to ensure trade unions could not be liable for damages incurred during strike action, introduced free school meals for all children, and empowered local authorities to purchase agricultural land from private landlords. Campbell-Bannerman resigned as Prime Minister on 3 April 1908 due to ill health and was replaced by his Chancellor, H.H. Asquith. He died 19 days later. Early life and family. Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman was born on 7 September 1836 at Kelvinside House in Glasgow as Henry Campbell, the second son and youngest of the 6 children born to Sir James Campbell of Strathcathro and his wife Janet Bannerman. Sir James Campbell had started work at a young age in the clothing trade in Glasgow, before going into partnership with his brother in 1817 to found J&W Campbell & Amp Co., a warehousing, general wholesale and retail drapery business. Sir James was elected as a member of Glasgow Town Council in 1831 and stood as a Conservative candidate for the Glasgow constituency in the 1837 and 1841 general elections, before being appointed to serve as the Lord Provost of Glasgow from 1840 to 1843. Henry's older brother, James, served as the Conservative Member of Parliament for Glasgow and Aberdeen universities from 1880 to 1906. He was opposed to the majority of his younger brother's policies, and chose to stand down in the same election that would bring Campbell-Bannerman to power. In 1871, Henry Campbell became Henry Campbell-Bannerman, the addition of the surname Bannerman being a requirement of the will of his uncle, Henry Bannerman, from whom he inherited the estate of Hunton Court in Kent. Campbell-Bannerman was educated at the High School of Glasgow, the University of Glasgow, and Trinity College, Cambridge, where he achieved a third-class degree in the classical tripos. After graduating, he joined the family firm of J&W Campbell & Amp Co., based in Glasgow's Ingram Street. Campbell was made a partner in the firm in 1860. Following his marriage that year to Sarah Charlotte Bruce, Henry and his new bride set up residence at 6 Claremont Gardens in the Park District in the West End of Glasgow. The couple never had any children. Physically, the couple, both reportedly enormous eaters, each weighed nearly 20 stone in later years. Campbell-Bannerman spoke French, German and Italian fluently, and every summer he and his wife spent a couple of months in Europe, usually in France and at the spa town of Marienbad in Bohemia. Member of Parliament. In April 1868, at the age of 31, Campbell-Bannerman stood as a Liberal candidate in a by-election for the Stirlingburgs constituency, narrowly losing to fellow Liberal John Ramsay. However, at the general election in November of that year, Campbell-Bannerman defeated Ramsay and was elected to the House of Commons as the Liberal Member of Parliament for Stirling Burghs, a constituency that he would go on to represent for almost 40 years. Campbell-Bannerman rose quickly through the ministerial ranks, being appointed as Financial Secretary to the War Office in Gladstone's first government in November 1871, serving in this position until 1874 under Edward Cardwell, the Secretary of State for War. When Cardwell was raised to the peerage, Campbell-Bannerman became the Liberal government's chief spokesman on defence matters in the House of Commons. He was appointed to the same position from 1880 to 1882 in Gladstone's second government, and after serving as Parliamentary and Financial Secretary to the Admiralty between 1882 and 1884, Campbell-Bannerman was promoted to the Cabinet as Chief Secretary for Ireland in 1884. In Gladstone's third and fourth governments, in 1886 and 1892 to 1894 respectively, as well as Rosebery's government from 1894 to 1895, he served as Secretary of State for War. During his time in this office, he persuaded the Duke of Cambridge, the Queen's cousin, to resign as Commander-in-Chief of the British Armed Forces. This earned Campbell-Bannerman a knighthood. In 1895, Campbell-Bannerman lobbied strongly to be appointed Speaker of the House of Commons, in part because he sought a less stressful role in public life. Rosebery, backed by the Chancellor of the Exchequer William Harcourt, refused since Campbell-Bannerman was viewed as indispensable to the government's front bench team in the lower house. Leader of the Liberal Party. On 6 February 1899, Campbell-Bannerman succeeded Sir William Vernon Harcourt as leader of the Liberals in the House of Commons, and leader of the opposition. The Boer War of 1899 split the Liberal Party into imperialist and pro-Boer camps, leaving Campbell-Bannerman with the difficult task of holding together the strongly divided party, which was subsequently and unsurprisingly defeated in the khaki election of 1900. Campbell-Bannerman caused particular friction within his own party when in a speech to the National Reform Union in June 1901 and shortly after meeting Emily Hobhouse, he described the concentration camps set up by the British in the Boer War as methods of barbarism. However, the Liberal Party was later able to unify over its opposition to the Education Act 1902 and the Brussels Sugar Convention of 1902, in which Britain and 9 other nations attempted to stabilize world sugar prices by setting up a commission to investigate export bounties and decide on penalties. The Conservative government of Arthur Balfour had threatened countervailing duties and subsidies of West Indian sugar producers as a negotiating tool. The convention's intent was to lead to the gradual phasing out of export bounties, and Britain would then forbid the importation of subsidized sugar. In a speech to the Cobden Club on 28 November 1902, Campbell-Bannerman denounced the convention as threatening the sovereignty of Britain. It means that we abandon our fiscal independence, together with our free trade ways, that we subside into the 10th part of a Veemdiricht, which is to direct us what sugar is to be countervailed, at what rate %. We are to countervail it, how much is to be put on for the bounty, and how much for the tariff being in excess of the convention tariff, and this being the established order of things. The British Chancellor of the Exchequer in his robes obeys the orders that he receives from this foreign convention, in which the Britisher is only 1 out of 10, and the House of Commons humbly submits to the whole transaction. Sir, of all the insane schemes ever offered to a free country as a boon, this is surely the maddest. Quote, However, it was Joseph Chamberlain's proposals for tariff reform in May 1903 that provided the Liberals with a great and nationally resonating cause on which to campaign and unify. Due to its protectionist nature, Chamberlain's proposals dominated politics through the rest of 1903 up until the general election of 1906. Campbell-Bannerman, like other Liberals, held an unshakable belief in free trade. In a speech at Bolton on 15 October 1903, he explained in greater detail the reasoning behind Liberal support for free trade. "We are satisfied that it is right because it gives the freest play to individual energy and initiative and character and the largest liberty both to producer and consumer. We say that trade is injured when it is not allowed to follow its natural course, and when it is either hampered or diverted by artificial obstacles. We believe in free trade because we believe in the capacity of our countrymen. That at least is why I oppose protection root and branch, veiled and unveiled, one-sided or reciprocal. I oppose it in any form. Besides, we have experience of 50 years, during which our prosperity has become the envy of the world." Quote, in 1903, the Liberal Party's chief whip Herbert Gladstone negotiated a pact with Ramsay MacDonald of the Labour Representation Committee to withdraw Liberal candidates to help LRC candidates in certain seats, in return for LRC withdrawal in other seats to help Liberal candidates. This attempt to undermine and outflank the Conservatives, which would prove to be successful, formed what became known as the Gladstone-MacDonald Pact. Campbell-Bannerman got on well with Labour leaders, and he said in 1903, "We are keenly in sympathy with the representatives of Labour. We have too few of them in the House of Commons." Despite this comment, and his sympathies with many elements of the Labour movement, he was not a socialist. One biographer has written that he was deeply and genuinely concerned about the plight of the poor and so had readily adopted the rhetoric of progressivism, but he was not a progressive Prime Minister. The Liberals found themselves suddenly returned to power in December 1905 when Arthur Balfour resigned as Prime Minister, prompting Edward VII to invite Campbell-Bannerman to form a minority government as the first Liberal Prime Minister of the 20th century. At 69, he was the oldest person to become Prime Minister for the first time in the 20th century. Balfour had hoped that Campbell-Bannerman would not be able to form a strong government, ushering in a general election that he could win. Campbell-Bannerman also faced problems within his own party, through the so-called Relugus Compact between H. Asquith, Sir Edward Grey and Richard Haldane, who planned to force him into the House of Lords, weakening him as Prime Minister and effectively allowing Asquith to govern as leader of the House of Commons. Campbell-Bannerman saw off both of these issues by offering the positions of Chancellor of the Exchequer, Foreign Secretary and Secretary of State for War to Asquith, Grey and Haldane respectively, which all three accepted, whilst immediately dissolving Parliament and calling a general election. In his first public speech as Prime Minister on the 22nd of December 1905, Campbell-Bannerman launched the Liberal election campaign, focusing on the traditional Liberal platform of peace, retrenchment and reform. Expenditure calls for taxes, and taxes of the plaything of the tariff reformer. Militarism, extravagance, protection are weeds which grow in the same field, and if you want to clear the field for honest cultivation you must root them all out. For my own part, I do not believe that we should have been confronted by the spectre of protection if it had not been for the South African War. Depend upon it that in fighting for our open ports and for the cheap food food and material upon which the welfare of the people and the prosperity of our commerce depend. We are fighting against those powers, privileges, injustices, and monopolies which are unalterably opposed to the triumph of democratic principles. Helped by the Lib-Lab Pact that he had negotiated, the splits in the Conservatives over free trade and the positive election campaign that he fought, the Liberals won by a landslide, gaining 216 seats. The Conservatives saw the number of seats more than halve, and Arthur Balfour, now as leader of the opposition, lost his Manchester East seat to the Liberals. Campbell-Bannerman would be the last ever Liberal to lead his party to an absolute majority in the House of Commons. Now, with a majority of 125, Campbell-Bannerman was successfully returned to Downing Street as a considerably strengthened Prime Minister. The defeat of the Relugus conspirators in the wake of this stunning victory was later referred to as one of the most delicious comedies in British political history, whereas in the past it had never been used formally. Campbell-Bannerman was the First Lord of the Treasury to be given official use of the title Prime Minister, a standard that continues to the present day. In 1907, by virtue of being the Member of Parliament with the longest continuous service, Campbell-Bannerman achieved the honour of becoming the Father of the House, the only serving British Prime Minister to do so to date. Social reforms. In his election address, Campbell-Bannerman spoke in favour of reforming the poor law, reducing unemployment and improving working conditions in sweated factories. The liberal imperialist Richard Haldane claimed that Campbell-Bannerman's government was, if anything, too conservative, with the dear old Tory CB at the head of it, determined to do as little as a fiery majority will allow him. However, the historian A.J.A. Morris disagreed with this judgment, stating that Campbell-Bannerman was in 1906 what he had always been, a Gladstonian liberal who favoured retrenchment in public expenditure that was perhaps at odds with any ambitious scheme of social reform. Another biographer, John Wilson, called Campbell-Bannerman a moderate social reformer, stating that Campbell-Bannerman favoured a better deal for the poor and the workers, but like Gladstone he was opposed to too much state interference. The government of Campbell-Bannerman allowed local authorities to provide free school meals and strengthened the power of the trade unions with their Trade Disputes Act 1906. The Workmen's Compensation Act 1906 gave some workers the right against their employer to a certain amount of compensation if they suffered an accident at work. The Probation of Offenders Act 1907 was passed, which established supervision within the community for young offenders as an alternative to prison. Under Campbell-Bannerman's successor H.H. Asquith, much more far-reaching reforms were implemented. House of Lords reforms. In the matter of House of Lords reforms, which was to become the dominant issue of the 1910 elections, Campbell-Bannerman proposed on the 26th of June 1907 that the Lords enjoy purely ornamental ancient privileges, but be deprived of all real legislative power, and that the Commons, after tolerating for a few months the futile criticisms of the Lords, would be empowered by mere lapse of a brief fraction of a year to ignore the very existence of a second chamber, and to proceed to pass the statute on their own authority, like the ordinances of the Long Parliament during the English Civil War. In essence, he maintained that the predominance of the Commons must prevail, without any appeal to the constituencies. Mackechnie characterized this as an untried one-chambered legislature, and stated that it could only be carried out by some revolutionary procedure. Foreign Affairs. Campbell-Bannerman's premiership saw the Entente with Russia in 1907, brought about principally by the Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey. In January 1906, Grey sanctioned staff talks between Britain and France's Army and Navy, but without any binding commitment. These included the plan to send 100,000 British soldiers to France within 2 weeks of a Franco-German war. Campbell-Bannerman was not informed of these at first, but when Grey told him about them he gave them his blessing. This was the origin of the British Expeditionary Force that would be sent to France in 1914 at the start of the Great War with Germany. Campbell-Bannerman did not inform the rest of the cabinet of these staff talks because there was no binding commitment and because he wanted to preserve the unity of the government. Radical members of the cabinet such as Lord Loreburn, Lord Morley and Lord Bryce would have opposed such cooperation with the French. Campbell-Bannerman visited France in April 1907 and met the radical Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau. Clemenceau believed that the British would help France in a war with Germany, but Campbell-Bannerman told him Britain was in no way committed. He may have been unaware that the staff talks were still ongoing. Not long after this, Violet Cecil met Clemenceau and she wrote down what he had said to her about the meeting. Clemenceau said, "I'm totally opposed to you. We both recognize a great danger and you are reducing your army and weakening your navy." Said Bannerman, "but that is for economy." Then said that he thought the English ought to have some kind of military service, at which Bannerman nearly fainted. "It comes to this," said Clemenceau, "in the event of your supporting us against Germany, are you ready to abide by the plans agreed upon between our war offices and to land 110,000 men on the coast, while Italy marches with us in the ranks?" Then came the crowning touch of the interview. The sentiments of the English people would be totally averse to any troops being landed by England on the continent under any circumstances. Clemenceau looks upon this as undoing the whole result of the Entente Cordiale and says that if that represents the final mind of the British government, he has done with us. Campbell-Bannerman's biographer John Wilson has described the meeting as a clash between two fundamentally different philosophies. The liberal journalist and friend of Campbell-Bannerman, F.W. Hearst, claimed that Campbell-Bannerman had not a ghost of a notion that the French Entente was being converted into a return to the old balance of power which had involved Great Britain in so many wars on the continent. That Grey and Haldane did not inform the cabinet is astonishing. That a true-hearted apostle of peace like Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman should have known of the danger and yet concealed it from his colleagues is incredible, and I am happy to conclude with an assurance that in the days of his triumph the Liberal leader, having fought a good fight, kept the faith to the end and was in no way responsible for the European tragedy that came to pass 6 years after his death. Campbell-Bannerman's government granted the Boer states, the Transvaal and the Orange River Colony, self-government within the British Empire through an order in council so as to bypass the House of Lords. This led to the Union of South Africa in 1910. The first South African Prime Minister, General Louis Botha, believed that Campbell-Bannerman's act had redressed the balance of the Anglo-Boer War, or had, at any rate, given full power to the South Africans themselves to redress it. The former Boer General Jan Smuts wrote to David Lloyd George in 1919, "My experience in South Africa has made me a firm believer in political magnanimity, and your and Campbell-Bannerman's great record still remains not only the noblest but also the most successful page in recent British statesmanship." However, the Unionist politician Lord Milner opposed it, saying in August 1907, "People here, not only Liberals, seem delighted, and to think themselves wonderfully fine fellows for having given South Africa back to the Boers." I think it all sheer lunacy, retirement and death. Not long after he became father of the house in 1907, Campbell-Bannerman's health took a turn for the worse. Following a series of heart attacks, the most serious in November 1907, he began to fear that he would not be able to survive to the end of his term. He eventually resigned as Prime Minister on 3 April 1908, and was succeeded by his Chancellor of the Exchequer, Herbert Asquith. Campbell-Bannerman remained both a Member of Parliament and leader of the Liberal Party, and continued to live at 10 Downing Street in the immediate aftermath of his resignation, intending to make other arrangements in the near future. However, his health began to decline at an even quicker pace than before, and he died 19 days following his resignation on the 22nd of April 1908. His last words were, "This is not the end of me." He remains today the only former Prime Minister to die within 10 Downing Street. Campbell-Bannerman was buried in the churchyard of Magle Parish Church, Perthshire, near Belmont Castle, his home since 1887. A relatively modest stone plaque set in the exterior wall of the church serves as a memorial.